Welcome and thank you for coming to the final reading on the Berry campus for the semester. This is the senior reading for the 6th graduating seniors. Next December. There's a reception following with cheese and crackers and cookies and all sorts of things to drink. I'm going to introduce our first reader, Trevor Almy. He worked as a student tutor in the Writing Center for 2 years and has been developing a creative writing portfolio since his first year at Berry College. However, in a sense, he has been writing since before he could write, as when he was a small child, he used to dictate stories to his older siblings for them to pen. Currently, he is working on a novel that he hopes to have drafted by the end of the year. All right, Trevor Almy.
All right, I guess I'm going to commit one of the highest sins and read first draft of the senior reading. Especially in light of what was released in the news over spring break. I don't know if y'all heard about the former coach here who awarded Vetus. Just in light of that, it just sort of motivated this poem. Take it out with the trash, the woman said, her fingers dotted red. The sweat beneath his ball cap ran as he pondered what to do. He took a black trash bag, folded up a couple for him, and loaded it in his van. No sooner was he on the highway, swallowed between mad hornets, cars zipping by, than he thought he heard an infant's cry. He pulled back the black curtain to see a face no water cleansed, a piece of cord not cut, and a head on which no eye of pity fell. He saw eyes that would not open, heard cries that were not made, a head shrunken, shriveled, orange and blue, a head that resembled someone like you. Outside, shadows grew longer. The man's trembling hands turned the radio knob. He coughed, smoker's hands, and said, I know just what I'll do. I'll take you and throw you in an open field. But he passed the next intersection and recalled his storage facility that was not far. Wheeling the van around, cruel inertia slung tools everywhere. He cried, "Damn!" at the side of the broken handle to Philip's head, while outside gravel and dirt were slung into wind riddles as he turned. Outside, the sky was nimbus gray, as it was the ending of the day. He parked his van next to the heavy door, thought about backing in, but then thought otherwise. It won't take long, he wheezed. Jingling his keys, he opened the lock, and with one quick heave lifted the heavy door. Slid in, slid out. No one noticed. But atop broken crates, fertilizer seed, and garden shovels, discarded like a broken sack, lay in the broken form, wallowing in blood. As if impossible were it so, it moved. He took one look back over his shoulder and then spit and spit and spit. In darkness, there is neither night nor day. It'll happen like this. The door will rustle with a jolt, slide upwards along its tracks, and a shaft of light with motes carried down the screen to barely discernible brow. Live. I'm just going to read a short segment from a novel I'm working on. So it's a lot lighter subject. So, to many, Walter Green was a lecturer who loved booze and Cantonese women on bar stools. To some, he was a crackpot local who believed the Roman Catholic Church conspired to kill Lincoln and that aliens were controlling the White House from some unknown location in Arizona. The world is a predictable place in that the predictability of certain events is said to be the fact that there are no order of causes and thus no predictability, Arnold said as the waitress walked by and placed a mug of beer in front of him. The head spilled over in golden waves. The man next to him puffed a stream of smoke out of his nose. The sound of clanking silverware, glasses, and dishes joined the hubbub of conversation and laughter, momentarily drowning out the two men's conversation. Arnold's happy lunch lay on his plate, a shredded grilled chicken sandwich, French fries doused in ketchup, some celery, and a portion of a child's hamburger. A fly landed on the abandoned food. It's kind of like this, the gray-haired man said when the commotion had ceased. The whole economy's gone to shit. There ain't been no increase in jobs since August of last year. People are starving on the streets. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his cane. Walter Green was a car mechanic who distrusted people almost as much as he distrusted the American dollar. He had believed since the early 80s that the country would revert back to the gold standard. His auto shop on Fifth Avenue was a family-owned business, but Walter learned his trade as much from Motor Weekly as he did from his father. It was in Arnold, the man whom he fixed a bad generator valve for 6 years ago in a worn-out Mazda, an accomplishment that Arnold himself deemed worthy of constant reminder that he gave all of his solaces. And Arnold didn't mind, for to fix a valve that for some time had baffled every mechanic between Winsong and Cherokee, mechanics who, according to Walter, were pampered city breds, was nothing short of automotive wizardry to Arnold. So Arnold listened to Walter as he told him everything. He told him about the government's hidden contract with the Mason. He told him about NASA's discovery of a solar flare so massive that it would change Earth's climate entirely. He told him about his home out on Maple Circle, a two-story wreck that Arnold had been to twice, where Walter stockpiled large quantities of gasoline, water, spark plugs, flashlights, and salt in preparation for Armageddon. But at least teen pregnancies are down, and no one's brought a gun into one of those high schools looking to fill somebody full of lead in quite some time either. Last year you would hear of those stories all the time, but that's when the employment rate was up. You see, the economy really is a sign. People don't think to sin when they're starving. He took a long, slow sip of his beer. People were finally filling the pews again. Was Walter right? Could there really be a relationship between the economy and people's morals? It had been a while since another school shooting was reported on the news, hadn't it? Arnold didn't know. He found himself seldom watching the news lately, unable to understand the interrelatedness between all the stories. For Arnold, there had to be some connection between them all, between the 6-year-old that drowned in a lake outside his home in southern Mississippi and the summer fires in Florida, or between the lottery winner who gave his winnings to help foreign aid and the water polo player who, as a jest, wore flotation devices to every match. There had to be a common ground to them all, and perhaps that is why Arnold grew more interested in conspiracies. And what about teen pregnancies? This again was another topic about which he was uninformed, having never really known any teens, much less any pregnant teens. And he hadn't stepped foot in a church since the time when Reagan droned on about Soviet control of the Cuban airfield and then address on national security. Perhaps there was some kind of interrelatedness between the two, people's morals and the economy, Arnold thought, and for a moment he saw Walter as if he was decoding some great cosmic riddle. Actually, teen pregnancies were twice what they had been in the past 5 years. Church attendance was down 10% from its annual average, and the number of gun-related crimes was up 12%. And comparing records of violent crimes to the Dow Jones Industrial Average and employment rates of the last decade revealed the trend is for the crime rate to increase when the stock market is down and employment is greater. Walter leaned back in his chair and grinned. "I'm composing a militia, Arnold." Arnold was sipping on his beer and nearly spilled it when Walter spoke. "A what?" "A militia. It'll include 4 or 5 men. I was hoping you could join. What do you say?" What's our function?" "To clean up the city. It's filth. Also, in case the Germans come back." There was no coming back for the Germans since they had never arrived in the first place. Arnold looked at his watch. It was 11:45. "Shit. I know, ain't it? But we'll take care of the city, you and I, Arnold." "No, not the city." "Huh?" Walter leaned. "What then? The watch?" "No, shit as in I need to get to work." Arnold stood up to pay the waitress. "Well, consider what I've told you. We really need all the men we can get. You just wouldn't believe how resistant people are these days to the idea of a public service for the good and justice of all. Despicable, really." "I'll consider it. There would be a heavy lucre in it for you too, of course. Of course."
Our next reader is W. Brian Boone, and I've never seen that version of the name. So you may know him as Boone. Boone is a senior writing major, graduating in December. He transferred to Barry from Appalachian State University. He's written for Barry's student newspaper, Campus Carrier, as an opinion columnist. And after a much needed year off after graduation in December, He hopes to continue his writing education in New England. His family still lives in southeast Georgia, where they run a small commercial fishing operation. Boone grew up very near to the actual hunting club portrayed in his excerpt and returns there every year for Thanksgiving and Christmas.
I'm going to read an excerpt from that story. Bear with me. And if I have time left, I'll probably read a poem too. I'm not sure how long this will take. The race had ended with 2 shots from Carter. A medium and a small doe came out 50 yards east of Carter's stand. It was late in the season, and Carter had taken his quota of does. Overcoming the reflex to watch does float across the desolate field, Carter led the larger of the does by a few feet and pulled the trigger twice. Her body fell into a skid and rested against one of the wood piles. He was staring apologetically into the animal's breathing eyes when the doe's back legs began to kick the black dirt. And despite the pain it caused his back, he knelt down with one leg on the doe's neck and slit the windpipe. Life hissed out like a birthday balloon while Carter watched the smaller doe finish crossing the clearing. She didn't look back, he noted. That evening, upon hearing Coley's story, he pieced together what had happened during that race. He thought in silence while he sliced the skin off the doe that hung by her hind legs from the gimbal arm. When the buck backtracked and changed directions, he must have jumped the 2 females. At that moment, he went to ground, knowing there was no way to signal the frightened pair to stay where they are. Knowing the dogs would follow the does, the buck could do nothing but listen as they ran right over him in pursuit of what possibly was his maiden silence. Carter was nonplussed by the sheer animal logic. The buck could have gone either way, west or east, but choosing east set in motion the day's events. The block had been surrounded, and no one saw the buck cross out of the block. Carter began to wonder what the buck thought about. When the buck's sensitive ears heard the shots, did he know what they meant? Did he ignore the finality of the sounds with the same preternatural logic that told him to go to ground? He acted with a rationale that Carter identified as non-human. He couldn't stop thinking about it until he finally decided that he must be getting sentimental in his old age. He quickly admitted to himself that he had always been sentimental and never thought of it as a character flaw, while his wife had always accused him of being overly sentimental and given to drama. She had, for all intents and purposes, been his only love. There were other girls in college that he thought he was in love with at the time, but with the hindsight of the first few years of marriage, he assumed that he had only been naive. When she nonchalantly told him she was in love with someone else, he hadn't blamed her or tried to deny his faults. He was thankful that she stayed until their son Thomas went off to college. He knew he hadn't been a great husband, and he believed she had probably been right to leave him. What hurt the most for him had been her casual treatment of the breakup. It took him years just to get used to portioning a deer for one person, while she remarried in a matter of months. For a year after the divorce, stacks of Tupperware overpopulated his refrigerator. Now just cooking for himself made him tired. Beer, lead bottle. Stormy held a bottle of dark beer. Carter was the only person in the club who drank dark beer, and he knew she had gone to town just to get them. He took the bottle and thanked her, calling her baby. Stormy had dark hair and a foul mouth. She was 20 years younger than Carter and married, but flirted with him shamelessly and presumed it was only for his benefit. She hunted as hard as any man in the club and held her own drinking around the campfire. He was very fond of her and sent gifts back with her for her 2 sons every year after the holiday hunt. She was one of the only people who had continued to call him Lead Bottom after Thomas had died. The club members had given him the name after his son accidentally shot him in the ass. One of the pellets from the buckshot lodged in his lower back, so close to the spine that the doctors refused to remove it. Thomas swore the gun had been on safety the whole way to the hospital. Carter never let Thomas know that the pain from the nerve it sat on made him decide to take on early retirement that spring. While Carter was still settling into the trappings and grandiose plans of unemployment, Thomas died in his sleep in his college dorm room. His roommates said he sounded like he was trying to catch his breath, and they couldn't wake him. He would have been 41 this September. "What'd she weigh?" Stormy asked. Carter put down the beer and stared at his bloody handprint on the label. 80 or so, Carter said, carefully cutting the tenderloins, one of which he would eat tonight, and the other he offered to Stormy. "No, honey," she sang. "You keep those." Carter threatened her. "I'll just give it to Rizzo over there." Carter pointed the strip of meat at an obese beagle lying in the corner of the far kennel. Stormy smiled and held out a Ziploc bag and planted a quick kiss on Carter's lips. "You gotta have it your way, don't you, old man?" She returned to the campfire, leaving Carter lingering on the smell of her kiss. Carter finished cleaning the deer. Stormy cut on the generator to light up the cleaning pad. The machine's engine drowned out the campfire conversations, and Carter felt alone. He reached into the guts bucket and began to feel the firm baseball-sized heart. The doe's innards were still warm, and steam rose out of the bucket, bringing with it sweet, rank smells. He took half of the heart over to one of the dog pens and called for Dot. A lean treeing walker eased out of the darkness of the doghouse. In the moonlight, the heart looked black and almost beating. "Quite a day, little girl?" he asked as he slipped his black hand into the pen, letting her lick the blood off until she felt the textured meat. With a snap, she grabbed the heart and instinctively retreated back into the darkness of her box. "Good night, then," Carter said. He took the other half of the heart to Bycatch. Bycatch, the oldest of the dogs, was cranky as usual and thanklessly took the meat. In private, Carter called him old man. Still, Bycatch showed little affection. Carter joined the campfire crowd and told his part of the day. He left out the hawk that flew by him this morning and how it made him think of his son. Carter's stories at the fire were nearly exclusively about hunting, keeping his own musings private. Only once, while drunk, and after his son had died, did he read a poem to them, Housements to an Athlete Dying Young. Stormy broke the silence after he had finished reading. Getting up, she nodded goodnight and said only that the poem was beautiful. Carter said goodnight to everyone and walked by Stormy, gently squeezing her shoulder once. He crossed the camp, walking under two massive live oaks that would have been sprouting before the turn of the century. Oaks that size, Carter imagined, would have once covered the hunting club, as would have the cypress giants, that now could only be found in the most inaccessible parts of the swamp. Back in his cabin, firelight came in the window, bringing his eyes to a picture of his son holding up the head of a large 8-point by the antlers. Carter knelt beside him with an arm across his shoulders and one hand holding his son's shotgun. Jean had driven out to the club just to take pictures that night. Thomas fell asleep in the clubhouse after Carter let him join the drinking that night. That was one of the few nights that Jean ever slept out at the camp. And they made love that night, even though she had told Stormy that she was going to haul Carter over the coals for letting Thomas get drunk. Carter asked her afterwards if she was happy. "Sure, honey," she said in a warm voice. Carter held her while she fell asleep, wondering what she meant, but knowing better than to force any more out of the day. Carter lit the kerosene heater and filled his reservoir with water from a jug. He set his alarm for 4 o'clock and blew out the lamp next to his bed. From a cabinet next to the bookshelves over his bed, Carter grabbed a bottle of scotch, left there for especially painful nights. When Jean and he had begun to date seriously, she asked him if he would stop drinking when they had children. She left the house in a rage and spent 2 weeks in her mother's house after Carter brought home Thomas's ashes with a bottle of Johnny Walker. In the minutes before he fell into a fitful sleep, he thought about the buck out there under the waxing moon. Would the buck feed tonight or fast? Carter woke to the soft beeping of his travel clock. The kerosene heater flickered a weak flame, the only light in the cabin. Pain was morning's call to awareness for Carter. His back ached, and the spasms would be with him until his body decided to concede the battle. The pain spread up his chest and down his right arm, ending in what felt like electricity grounding in his fingers. He knew climbing a tree stand would soon be too much for his body. This morning held promise, though. He growled at the pain as soon as he forced himself out of bed. In a camouflage suit, he walked to the dog pens where Bycatch sat waiting, staring at the floors behind Carter. "Good morning, old man," Carter whispered to the monkish dog, and loaded him into the bed of the truck. If Carter wounded a deer, he would need the dog to follow the blood trail. He drove down Moss Church Road to the far end of the club where a ladder stand leaned against a seasoning white oak, looking down 3 rows of loblolly pines. Bycatch laid on a pile of old moleskins in the bed of the pickup and did not acknowledge the whisper to wish his master luck. It was still completely dark as Carter walked down the fire break to the stand. The first bits of light turned the pine rows into hazy tunnels that glowed with lighter shades of blue as the morning went on. Within the first hour in the stand, 2 black shadows appeared down the pine row west of Carter's stand. 2 deer were feeding 25 yards down the trail. The pain in his chest returned, taking his thoughts from the past and putting him into the present, comfortable and unaware of everything but his heart and the 2 shadows evanescing in and out of his pupil's tolerance for the near absence of light. He watched the shadows feed until they made out their hornless heads. Something spooked the does, and both raised tail and seemed to listen with their whole bodies before trotting off for the swampy southern boundary of the clubland. In the stand, for more than 3 hours, Carter's back was an hourglass of pain, with red-hot sand that settled in the base of his spine. Soon he would have to return to the camp for some strong coffee and Percocets. The buck didn't come, and Carter lowered his rifle down the string from his pocket. Bycatch, lying unmoved in the truck's bed, had both eyes open but didn't look up to ask why there had been no shots. On the front porch of the cabin, Carter boiled water for coffee and drank 2 cups with lunch and read until everybody returned for the morning races. Stormy's husband, Jeff, backed his truck into the skinning racks with a doe and a cowhorn spike. The lifeless bodies of the deer looked like they were sleeping, while Jeff told the other members about the races. In all his life, Carter had only feared for his own life only once, and that had been when Thomas had shot him. The pain had been amazing. It hurt in a way that he didn't think was possible. Carter thought about what it must be like to be the deer. Did the deer understand the process of hunting and know what was at stake? He thought people didn't give enough credit to the animals. When he died, he wanted to know what the deer thought. And for decades, he had given serious thought to reincarnation. If heaven existed, it would have to be whatever we wanted. He wanted to be a deer, hunted. He wanted to feel everything at risk and be able to choose to run from it. The only reason he had to run now was outside twice a night to piss. He only slept straight through the night 1 time out of 20. Most of the time now, he slept an hour and then woke up to roll away from the pain that came from whichever way he slept. Carter walked over to the skinning racks in time to see Jeff lift the spike onto the scale with ease. "See anything?" Jeff asked. Jeff steadied the body of the deer until the scale stopped bouncing up and down. 2 does, Carter replied. "Are you going back out to your other stand this evening, or are you going to dog hunt with us?" Jeff asked, warmly accusing the old man of becoming too fond of the more passive styles of hunting. "Which block are you hunting after lunch?" Carter asked, hoping that the dog hunting stayed away from his still hunting plans. "Big Dry Creek, I guess. 2 big tracks went in there this morning, and it's far enough away to hope something is still bedded down." The pain from Carter's back peaked, and he smelled the bitter scent of blood deep in his nasal cavities. This was the block where his son had shot him. Not today. I'm going to take a rest here and head out to 10-Point Oak a little early." "Maybe that buck hasn't crossed out of the county just yet," Carter said. "All right, as good a place as any," Jeff replied, without taking his eyes from the cuts he made into the backstraps of the hanging spike. With the fresh dogs loaded in 2 separate trucks, the caravan headed towards the creek. When the block was surrounded, everyone radioed their call signs, and Jeff let loose the first pack and walked them over the track area. Carter followed the race on his radio. The dogs lost the track, and the race refused to materialize quickly. Carter switched off the radio and grabbed a green toiletry bag from inside the door of the cabin. In the clubhouse shower, he lathered his wrinkled body with scentless deodorant soap and scrubbed everywhere he could reach. He rinsed off, praying for that evening. He reached for his towel, and a pain shot up his back and bypassed its usual path down his right arm, ending in his head. Carter leaned against the wall, lightheaded and angry. He regained composure and walked burdened back to his cabin across the abandoned camp. He dressed in his camouflage and looked at the quilt on his bed. His wife had made it for him for their 15th wedding anniversary, ignoring the tradition's call for crystal. It was faded now, but he still remembered her sewing for hours a day to finish it in time. At night, he would massage lotion into her hands with the hope of quietly making love while Thomas slept in the room down the hall. His hands ached now as he wiped down his rifle. Carter walked out to his truck and cranked the engine. He put the gun in the passenger seat and sped past the dog pens where Bycash was looking straight at him. The wind murmured through the swamp like it was too feeble to talk. Carter listened from a water oak that sat on a raised island near the swamp's lowest edge. In the evening light, water flowed into the swamp drain in a black tide, ignorant of the forces of the moon's rising gravity. Carter felt a strange feeling of contentment watching the leaves float in and out of the maze of half-submerged cypress knees below. His mind was clear and his body quiet. His heart seized when the buck appeared. It was a magnificent deer with a wide and tall spread rack. Carter couldn't breathe. The world began to spin furiously. He tried to will the cypress trees to keep their roots, praying for their strength. His heart pounded with excruciating pain. He thought of his wife's face the first time they made love. She looked as though she was about to burst into tears, beautiful and terrifying. The memory made him wince, and he closed his eyes from the building pain. When he opened them, the buck had raised his head and was looking at the dark oak like he had seen Carter's paroxysm. Carter saw his son motionless in a coffin waiting to be cremated. Carter raised the gun in the fullness of the evening light while the buck stood still and watched.
All right, so our next reader is Kate Brown, a senior English major with a concentration in creative writing. Having grown up in Decatur, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, she loves the city and the varied viewpoints on life that emerge from such a diverse population. Her shy nature has pushed her in her desire to write, breathe life into characters, and experience the world outside the strict confines of her own timidity. Abandoning journal after journal as a child, Kate began to feel as if she was not meant to devote her life to what seemed to be an often tedious task. However, her senior year of high school brought changes, and with guidance, Kate began to realize that the product often deserves the tedious labor put into its creation. After taking creative writing courses at Berry, Kate began to understand a fundamental rule about writing. If she ever wanted to be a good writer, she first had to be a very bad one. Writing now holds a place in her life that is far beyond routine journaling. She writes when she feels inspired. She understands that while inspiration cannot be expected every day, even something that seems commonplace can serve as the breeding ground for creativity. Patience, along with the hard work needed to form a creative piece out of a small inspiration, keeps her going in her efforts to express little pieces of the world in each poem and each piece of her fiction. After graduating in April, Kate hopes to return to Atlanta with a fresh outlook and a new determination. She also plans on pursuing her love of children's literature, learning about the publishing process, and hopefully creating her own pieces of work for children.
First, I'm going to read a short story that's still in progress, but it's a little hard. It might be hard to follow a little bit because it's a collage piece. So it's in the book, in the little one we got, and it starts on page 22. wind swept. And it starts with a quote by Henry David Thoreau. I would rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself than be crowded on a velvet cushion. He lifted each side of his body up the stairs, slightly wincing as he shifted his weight from one stiffened half to the other. He liked the view from the fourth floor. His body relaxed a little with the satisfaction that came from not giving in to the elevator's constant chirping, as it called to the hurried or lazy, impatiently waiting on each level. Ease is cheapened by a hard-fought battle, someone's grandfather used to say. He couldn't ever attach a face to the words, but whoever it was remained namelessly immortal because of this single ingenious comment. Generations far too busy to enter such wasteful pursuits of free thinking grab such statements as their own, cherishing words that could be quoted without being taken too seriously. Stephen sat in a gap between generations, somewhere and sometime and lost him. Before him, the large uncurtained library windows offered a panoramic view of Ashton. He could only see the low tops of buildings. Identical gray shingles, perfectly aligned, made all the shops seem equally uninteresting. Straining his eyes a bit further, Stephen focused on the tall oaks that rose as Ashton's only tributes to the once historical town. The oaks stood like giants, capable of crushing the man-made structures. To Stephen, they resembled the tan steelworkers who once claimed Ashton awake, working hard to build a town without first killing it. Why did we even come? I thought getting out of bed each morning was your idea of exercise. Christian sputtered through droplets of water Sarah dribbled onto his severely chapped lips. Well, I'm sorry if I don't want you to kill yourself, Sarah snapped back, but I think there's a line that should be drawn between staying in shape and simply performing barbaric, masochistic deeds. Christian dropped to his knees and let the bar's circular weights slide off each of its sides onto the rubber matting. Then save my life into those weights back for me. Walking away, Christian felt for the steady drumbeat playing in his neck, keeping rhythm in his wrist. He picked the scaly skin already peeling from his hands and was suddenly afraid he might fall apart. As the dry skin flaked away, his hands felt tighter and more willing to break. He couldn't remember what it felt like before he was anxious, always tense to the point of explosion. Perhaps when he was rocking himself in his mother's womb, he felt relaxed. But even then, he guessed he might have felt seasick. Stephen never checked out any books or read any while he was there. He had never even touched a single shelf. He just stood by the window, fingering through Walden's pages, the same dog-eared copy he always clutched in his right hand, and devoured the view. Observers probably thought he appeared younger walking down the stairs than he did going up, almost as if some tremendous cyst had been removed from his body and he could now walk without its burden. Avoiding the automatic doors, Stephen left by a back exit that opened next to an overpowering dumpster and half-empty recycling bin. Snatching a paper coffee cup with his free hand, Stephen continued on through the cobblestone paths, suddenly feeling himself begin to walk to the rhythm of fast-paced heels. He paused in front of Rocco's ice cream, planting himself as a boulder in the middle of the fast-flowing stream. Wrapping his wrinkled fingers lightly against the window, Stephen caught a man's attention and motioned him to the door. Waving in recognition, the young man, clad in an apron, but dunning torn jeans and hemp jewelry underneath, came to the door and without a word received the cup from Stephen's outstretched hand. For where shall a man go who has no money? Wide, wide world, but only as narrow as the coins in your hand. Christian's legs moved awkwardly in his desk as Markandiah spoke these words to him. Perhaps it is selfish to assume a book speaks only to oneself, but Christian was only as selfish as he needed to be. On his way to his 8th Street apartment, Christian stopped at one of the countless McDonald's dotting the city's crowded landscape. He bought a number 3 combo, spending around $5, and almost spilled $1 of it, attempting to balance a monstrous soda between excited lips and sweaty fingers. Christian rolled the fresh, cold quarters he received his change around in his damp palms. He could tell that the feel of skin was new to them. Completely void of control, Christian fumbled the change into a Ronald McDonald Save the Children fund, a dilapidated cardboard house that hadn't stood a chance against hungry bull teeth, scratchy nails, and restless pins. You're so lucky. You really can go anywhere you want, Sarah said the day the letter came. You should get away from here, as far away as you can. If I had the money, I'd leave in a heartbeat. Do it for your own sake, or at least for mine. Christian didn't like how the food tasted as it slowly crawled down the sides of his throat. He felt a wave of nausea settle over him that refused to subside until he stopped eating. But he couldn't stop now. He had known there would be consequences. Throwing away the empty remains of his tray, Christian's shame hurried him out and turned him towards the more fashionable side of town. After walking only a few blocks, a women's kickboxing class began chanting at him from behind the window of the local gym. He felt like they were taunting him, daring him to test his strength. "We always fight," the doctor told Sarah. "That's why we're such good friends. If you only fought yourself, there wouldn't be much left of you." Christian rubbed his palms against each other, letting the dry skin flake onto the stony earth beneath him. If the skin peeled far enough, a pile of loose ends might spill out, he agonized, leaving unrecognizable pieces without sign of an owner. His mind deep in contemplation, Christian's feet continued on as they pleased, leading him blindly through overcrowded sidewalks and bicycle lanes. Suddenly looking up, he found himself almost face to face with a sullen-looking man, far his elder in years, who, although being touched by a stranger, seemed to take no notice. With a single redemptive motion, Christian grabbed a dollar bill lodged in between sock and ankle bone and dropped it in the cup the man was holding. Bending forward, Stephen placed the cup by his feet. Water near the surface overflowed, baptizing the cobblestone and leaving it with a rejuvenated sheen. George Washington washed up, soaked and helpless. Letting out a shrill half whistle, Stephen called forth a dark, flea-infested lad who sauntered up from nowhere in particular. As if participating in a customary practice, the old fellow immediately dipped his crusted nose deep into the paper cup. Emerging for a quick breath, he paused a moment to sniff the dollar bills drifting, skipping down the wind-driven walkway. Returning to the cup and finding it empty, the colorless wanderer strode up to Stephen and rubbed his matted fur against his leg. Stephen reached down, wiping the path with his free hand, and placed Walden on the cleanest stone. 4 feet managed to scrape against its edges before Stephen could bring his entire body in contact with the cool, damp ground. As he lay his head upon Thoreau's pride, gathering the dust of passerby, the lad collapsed its bony frame a few feet away. Dragging his barely worn soles along the cobblestone, Christian suddenly looked down to see a dollar bill tapping lightly by the wind's influence upon the metal leg of an outdoor cafe chair. Squeezing the bill in his hand, searching for its familiar texture, Christian turned his head slightly towards the path on which he just traveled. Where the homeless man had been begging, he noticed 2 identical bundles wrapped tightly in the dust, settling over the city. And then I was just going to read a couple short poems. The first one is called 8:15 a.m. Washing Ritual. A still oceanic porcelain holds yesterday's salts and wilted skin. She sheds each day to grow anew, so her body can live what her mind will regret. She wipes away the frosted temptress draped in Egyptian cotton, wishing just once she could hear the advice that she knows she'll ignore when the frost fogs over and a deathly chill rolls off her body. And then 2 more short poems. This one, the title is taken actually from the New York Times obituary. This is going to sound like a great title. But, the title is Howard Gottlieb, an archivist with persistence, dies at 79. That's exactly how it was said in this obituary. Wind whispers nip at oak, arthritic fingers, arms stretched, woken by rips, weathered souls, embedding long forgotten leaves into earth's bruised skin. Light worshippers scurry like puppets moved by a hurried hand, as winds sigh each time they forget shadows need stopping. Whispers lost, she spits sap in their eyes. Light freckled with dark reminds them of days when the sun goes no further and the will of the leaf helps shape the world. And the last one is called After the Drought. You tried to drink the ocean dry, but it only kept you thirsty. Your hands could never hold enough to keep your heart from breaking. They told you houses built from sand and tears would wash away, that men used wood and nails to make life real. But you knew time and more if it could blow away like pages of the dead wood I heard resurrect with your voice, send pulsating into my fingers to burst like the tide that knows crashing makes you more alive.
Reader is Rebecca Dunn. Rebecca is a senior English major from Valdosta, Georgia. She started writing stories at 10 years old and hopes to continue writing the rest of her life. Next year, she plans to attend the University of Mississippi, where she will pursue a master's in Southern Studies.
Harrisonburg, Virginia. He clicked on the name Sandy Clifton, and the automatic dialing system dialed the number. The phone rang twice. Hello? A little voice blurred. It was one of those low, husky voices that was perfect on 1-900 chat lines, but in person would probably be a Google Change smoker. May I speak to Mrs. Sandy Clifton? What do you want? The voice continued. Mrs. Clifton? He said shyly. What do you want? She repeated. He gathered his courage. This is Sandy Clifton. This is Brian Randolph with AT&T, and I'd like to tell you about our new long-distance rate. For as little as 4 cents per minute, you can call anywhere in the United States. I've already got a plan, she interrupted. More one of those Demi Moore kind of voices, or a rich one like Jodie Foster. Brian pushed on. Compared to most, she was polite. At least she didn't slam the phone down or scream in his ear. Yes, but did you know if you switched today? The line was silent. Brian sighed. We needed to get 5 to sign on today, or we'd have to take days of Stanley, who would be basking in his failure. He moved his finger down the list of the computer screen. Mr. Phoenix of 115 Maple Lane. Brian clicked on the address and waited for the first ring. Nothing. He tried again. Hello? He said into the microphone. Hello? A rough voice answered, and Brian instantly recognized it. This is Clifton? Yeah, the voice said in a tone that made Brian sure she was annoyed. Brian's face turned red. I'm sorry, I didn't hang up. I just stopped talking. So you want to switch to AT&T? No, like I said, I've already got a plan. Brian broke for words. So much for staying on script, he thought nervously. He gathered his composure. Well, what can I help you with today? My daughter is getting married. It was a statement as if she was saying to a waitress, my dinner is cold. And Brian struggled for a response. He forced a happy tone. That's wonderful, congratulations. There's nothing wonderful about that, she snapped. So what's the problem, Brian saw his boss pass by in front of the cubicle. He waved his hand trying to catch his boss's attention, but his boss continued on to the break room. I don't want her to. Still the voice was unemotional. She could have been reading out a grocery list or talking about her car. That's understandable, you're her mother. He had heard about cases in which people would call telemarketers on holidays just to hear her voice, but had never witnessed it. With our new AT&T family plan, you can call her anytime. Brian heard her sigh into the phone. No, like I already said, I've got a plan. Besides, I don't want to talk to her anyway. I got divorced 12 years ago. She hesitated. And I should be the one getting married, not her. And I feel awful I'm not happy for her. I thought the same thing. Brian's voice trailed off. I've never congratulated my wife about being promoted. He explained he couldn't believe he was sharing this with anybody, much less a stranger. But once the words were out, others just naturally followed. She's successful at what she loves, and I don't know what to do about it. It scares me because I can't do the right thing and act happy for her. Why is that? I'm going to this dinner party tomorrow night with all her friends, all the people who are important in her life. I don't know any of them. You see, Brian felt the need to explain. They're not the type of people I want to get to know, but still feel like I should. But I don't know how to, so I don't. Don't know how to say anything or don't bother, she bit back. Do you think you would have bothered to get to know me? What if you ran into me? Would we have had this conversation? No. Brian was surprised and slightly disturbed at his answer. For the first time in years, he was telling someone the truth. He wouldn't have done the right thing. He was imagining a frail, gray-haired lady walking past him on the street or sitting in a restaurant beside him, passing him by every day, and he was just sitting there. Or best, he would muster a polite, hello, can I help you with those bags, ma'am? He spoke freely, as if he had lost all control over what he would say and what he wanted. He felt slightly ashamed, as if he was showing her a wet spot on the chair and admitting he didn't have any control over his bladder. We wouldn't have this conversation, Brian continued. He didn't know how to explain it. The way he chose to reveal certain parts of themselves to different people, how he pushed some parts away so hidden that nobody would ever see it unless they were looking directly at him. Sometimes it's the way you meet someone that determines everything, he told her. He was trying the best he could. For instance, my wife, Chris, I met her at the Bluebird Cafe. All the tables were full except for hers. She was with a friend who started talking to me. Between each performance, they both gave me their own critiques. There was this one guy with his hat that was 3 times too big for him. He sang this god-awful sad song about how he loved his dying mother. At the end of the night, I turned to them both, but I asked for Chris's number. He heard crunching on the other end of the phone. A bit muffled, she asked, "How did you know to ask for her number? Didn't you say you were talking to both of them?" "I just knew," he said, and paused. He didn't know what made him make the decision. Chris's friend had certainly been beautiful and witty too. How would his life been different now if he'd chosen a friend? Or would it have been the same, like two channels of a river going back to the same thing? Suddenly he remembered. It was the way she clasped and squeezed her drink each time a new performer played. She seemed so excited about the performance, and I suppose I thought live. Brian heard a laugh. "I've got a pretty good grasp on my coffee mug." "Sorry, already taken." "So you're saying despite squeezing my glass, it was just that moment with Chris in the cafe?" Brian heard her clear her throat. "So you wouldn't have been fascinated with the gesture if you'd seen him another day in another place?" Brian wasn't sure if it wasn't just a smile, a handshake, or something you can give to anyone at any time if you're in a tour. He wondered what would have happened if he had a bad day or she didn't feel like acting excited. Could that have been what had determined what had doomed him to go through life without knowing her? What about Sandy? This conversation was all he would have had from her. He would never get to meet her. He would never get to see her daughter or her daughter's husband, or get to know why in the world she was sharing her life with him. He wanted to give an answer, but he couldn't think of much to say, so he said, "I have no idea. I suppose Chris likes country music. We could have bonded over that." So what was it, Brian thought? Do we decide? And what gives us the right to determine who's worthy of our attention? And when we decide, how are we sure that we aren't mistaken and tricked into thinking a person's better than they really are? A strange thought entered his mind. All is based on common interest in timing. Brian interrupts his thought and spoke into the microphone. What if those people you're attracted to change at a different time than you do? What if you no longer have much in common? What if they change without you? She instantly said, "Are you talking about Crystal? Are you sure she's changed without you?" Brian thought for a moment. "She's changed without me, or maybe at the wrong time. I don't think we have anything in common anymore. She's never taken country music seriously. It's always been a side amusement while she was at Vanderbilt Nursing School. So it makes sense that she lost interest when she started working." Brian was hoping for sympathy, but instead she shot back. "Do you really want somebody that's just like you, shares every interest and goal with you, changes in the exact way and time that you do?" Brian remembered people he had shared too much in common with, and how he despised them. How he could see their weakness, his weakness, so clearly he would tear into their flesh, his own flesh, leaving them both bleeding. "Well," she said hoarsely, "if you don't feel flush with her anymore, why are you still with her?" Brian thought for a second. Some people treated relationships as they would newspapers, throwing out what had once been sensational the day before for this Sunday's edition. So others waited for the newspaper in order to bundle up, hoarding into closets, till there was too filled for any more. Brian didn't want to be either one. He reasoned that there were people that he could have been in his life that weren't. He remembered people who had taken the time to be in his life. He saw himself gathering these moments just as a child pockets unmanaged treasures of gray stones, paper clips, and brown pieces of tile. Put everything together in a collage, and he knew he needed every piece. He thought about Crystal and how she had worked to add to his life. Brian quit talking. What could have been, it didn't matter. The pressure from his headache had spread from the base of his eyebrow to the top of his forehead. He was done. He would never meet Sandy from Virginia, and he could accept that. That's it.
Okay. Next, we have Brent Simmons. Though his roots grow deep in New Orleans, Brent Simmons grew up in a military family. He's lived in nearly every region of the United States. Luckily, Brent was able to satisfy his wanderlust and maintain his restless lifestyle during his college career by studying in Australia, spending his summers in Hawaii, and backpacking in Fiji, as well as various regions of the United States. All of this leaving has given him what he has needed to stay stationary at Berry College for 4 years and finish his degree in English. Though his concentration of study has been in literature, Brent has taken several creative writing courses during his time at Berry. After he graduates, Brent will be working with the Peace Corps, teaching English as foreign language and literature courses in China at the University of London. Brent Simmons.
when I took fiction, and discovered I love writing nonfiction when I took nonfiction. So I can read it. It's called In Our Beds, and it is about my grandfathers and myself. In our beds. 0. I try to climb the family tree, but there is too much sap on the branches. My hands get covered in amber stickiness, and no matter how many times I spit into the palms of my hands and rub them together, the grime never shakes loose. There are so many faces, so many words, so many voices, images, and gestures, and it all gets pasted onto my hands as I climb. I stop and sit on a branch. I hold my hands in front of me and look at what I've acquired. A piebald accumulation, a melange of rich cognizance. I'm looking for something. I'm looking for nature, things that cannot be controlled, something to explain this threadbare existence, some way to deal with the weight. I pull off inapt pictures from my knuckles. I rip inconsequential voices from my fingertips. I tear immaterial faces and gestures from my palms. Peel everything off except what is needed. Throw them all in the air and watch them poise and float to the ground. A clarion refulgence of confetti. I look at what remains on my hands in front of me. I take my grandfather from my index finger and paste him on the tree trunk. 1. He ran from it. I take my other grandfather from my palm and paste him on the tree trunk just below his daughter's father-in-law. 2. He attacked it. All lined up, I lay my head on the tree trunk beside the pasted figures. 1. Gerald Semino is sitting on the chair halfway between the television and the wall, halfway between action and inaction, halfway between dismay and expectancy. He is planted on his posterior with both palms resting on his knees, tears running down his face, blue veins all over his legs. My grandmother sits down beside him. I don't know. Gerald, what is going on? I don't know. 2. Clayton Forrest Shook is lying on the ground halfway between the house and the shed, halfway between domesticity and productivity, halfway between death and life. He is lying on his back with one fist held straight up in the air, blood running down his face, scratches all over his arms. My grandmother walks out on the porch. I've got it. Daddy, what have you done? I've got it. 2. No one feels comfortable when speaking with Clayton. Not his children, not his grandchildren, not even his friends. He is always silent after you say something to him. You know he is thinking about what you just said, but he will never say exactly what that is. You know that he is disappointed in your choice of words, in your grammar, in the manner in which you failed to thoroughly chew whatever you wanted to say before actually saying it. It is actually best to swallow while in front of him. 1. Hail Mary, does Mary control the weather? Full of grace. If I pray to her, will she change her mind? The Lord is with thee. Pull the rope around the right side, make a loop and pull through. Blessed art thou among women. What time did the weatherman say it would be here? And blessed is the fruit. Has the priest evacuated too? Of thy womb, Jesus. If Mass is canceled tonight, will we die without receiving the Eucharist? What will happen to our souls? Holy Mary, is this board the right size for this window, or does it go on the next one? Mother of God, should we go east or west? Pray for us sinners now. The gas stations are going to run out of gasoline, and at the hour of our death. Amen. 2. Clayton's stay in the hospital was not long at all, but his recovery was almost more than he could handle. He packed a suitcase every Sunday night and traveled from their house in Arkansas to his school in Mississippi, leaving my grandmother alone for the first half of every week. He left after he was finished preaching at the evening church service and traveled by way of moonlit back roads down long stretches of cotton fields, far away from the hurried interstate and busy road signs. He bounced up and down in front of his students while conjugating Greek verbs, diagramming sentences, and speaking of proper translation in carefully chosen words and their effects on how we understand the New Testament. He came home midweek and spent most of the remaining days out in the shed or in his studies, He mended broken bird feeders and read commentary on the Gospel of Matthew. But all this ceased for a short while. 1. His wife sits across from him with her glasses in her left hand while she rubs her eyes with her right. She does this when she gets tired. Sometimes she gets so tired that she laughs uncontrollably about nothing at all. When asked what she was laughing about, she always replies, "Oh, nothing, just things in my head." The more she laughs, the more her eyes tear up, and the more she removes her glasses to rub her eyes. "Remember the time we stayed home?" Gerald is looking at the clock in the microwave. "You didn't stay home. You got stuck at work at night, and I stayed here with the kids. Scared as hell. It's getting late. I didn't even think to remove the bed to the middle of the room. I came in there in his room to check on the kids, and he was asleep with glass all over the bed. The window broke, and Brian slept right through it. The wind was blowing, and I thought the house was just going to get taken away. There was glass all over his bed, and he was cut off all over his little arms. Slept right on through it." Gerald keeps his attention on the clock. "What time should we leave tomorrow?" You pack the pictures and put them in the trunk?" "Yeah. What time do you want to leave in the morning?" "What the guy said on the TV. It'll be here in 36 hours. Let's leave by 5. I'll set the alarm for 4. With that, she rests her glasses back on her nose. But this is a pointless gesture, because in 2 minutes that they sit in stillness, waiting for the other one to make a move away from the table and down the hall to brush their teeth, she begins to laugh, causing her eyes to tear up, and she must, once again, remove her glasses to wipe her eyes. It is getting late. 2. "Good morning, Shook residents. It's almost bedtime. What are you up to?" "Well, I'm not up to anything. I'm not in the sky." "Sorry. What are you doing?" "I'm studying." "What are you studying?" "I'm studying for church tomorrow." "What are you preaching about tomorrow?" "Jesus." "Really?" Of course. Of course. "Are you feeling any better?" "I suppose." "How's your hip?" "Better." "Are you getting around any easier?" "I've been sitting in my recliner quite a bit." "Would you like to speak with your grandmother?" "Please." -1. "I remember driving to New Orleans from Georgia to surprise my grandparents for their 50th wedding anniversary. Tired from work, I didn't bother to pack a suitcase or a bag after I got out of the office. I just threw a basket of dirty clothes in my car and started driving. Farther west and farther south by the hour. The sun set in Alabama. I was in New Orleans by midnight. I pulled into the driveway, grabbed my basket of dirty clothes, and walked through the front door without knocking. Surprise! Happy anniversary! They were sitting in their recliners watching the news. The weatherman was standing in front of the ocean with a big, gray, computerized mass of swirling clouds. They had named that mass of clouds Katrina. I didn't own a television, and I didn't listen to the radio. This was the first time I had heard her name. "Oh, goodness, Brent, what a surprise. You'd better turn around and go get gas in your car." They didn't get up out of their recliners, and my grandfather didn't turn his head away from the television. I helped my grandfather tie down furniture in the front yard and board up windows. I listened to them argue about what time they should evacuate. We all left at 5 the next morning. They went west with picture albums in their trunk. I went east with a basket of dirty clothes in my back seat. 2. It must have been hard for Clayton to stay at home, and it must have been even harder to stay in the recliner. No Greek, no grammar, no students. Just my grandmother, who was the one person in the world who spoke to him endlessly. My grandmother must have talked to him about the most trivial things from the recliner next to his. She sat in her recliner and talked to him over the noise of the television. He sat in his recliner and read with the television controller in one hand and a book in the other, occasionally grunting. She wouldn't even be looking at him with the television, just talking. She spoke endlessly of her parakeet, Charlie, and the new tricks he had just learned. "Daddy, when I turned on the faucet to wash my coffee cup this morning, Charlie jumped right under the water and wanted to take a bath." Or, "Daddy, you remember that trip we took with Alveda and John to Oregon? Remember how when we were in the van and I said something about how I'm glad I ain't left-handed? And I looked over at Alveda and she was crocheting with her left hand? I felt so stupid." He looked at his page, just reading, and then it would suddenly be silent. He lifted his eyes from the page and her lips came to a close. Stillness for 53.5 seconds. Had it been years and not seconds, they could have lived out their entire married life in that stillness, and their memories would have been exactly the same. "Why did you need the television, Daddy?" "The commercials are 10 times louder than the news." -1. "I remembered laughing when my grandmother called to tell me my grandfather had just been attacked by a squirrel. I knew it wasn't funny at all because he had broken his hip, but I was in high school and I couldn't help but laugh. My mother wanted to know what I was laughing about and who was on the other end of the line. I told her I wasn't laughing and handed her the phone. I laughed even harder when my grandmother called a few months later to tell me that my grandfather had just taken up shooting squirrels from the backyard in our bedroom. 1. It takes 2 people to pull the bed out of the sofa. Gerald must grip the left side of the bed, and she must grip the right side. 1, 2, 3, pull. She begins to tuck the sides of the sheet under the mattress. He sits down on the edge of the bed and turns on the television. "Gerald, would you stop watching the weather? I just want to see if anything has changed before we go to sleep." "Gerald, you know it always changes. There's no sense in checking it every 10 minutes. Maybe we should leave at 4 instead of 5. Let me tell you something. An hour is not going to make a difference. But look, it turned north sooner than they said it would. We need to leave at 4. I'll set the alarm for 3. We're not leaving at 4. We're leaving at 5. Now lay down and try to sleep." 2. C. Forrest Shook is sitting on the edge of his bed with a pellet gun in his hands, looking out on the backyard through the sliding glass patio doors. He sees movement in the grass and slowly rises, gently slides the back door open, aims, and shoots. She enters the room. Daddy, I thought you said you were going to take a nap." He looks at her. He had just told her that he was going to take a nap before dinner, but he saw something move in the backyard as he laid himself to bed. "I got beans on the stove. Now lay down, Daddy. Dinner's going to be ready soon." He looks at her, sets the gun on the floor, swings his legs up on the bed, and lays down his head. 0. I'm looking for something with my eyes closed. Climb the family tree. Stomp on the branches, pluck the leaves, tear off the apples, and hang oranges with bent paper clips like Christmas ornaments in their stead. Fold the pictures in on themselves. Cut and paste faces and exchanges, thoughts and personalities, gestures and dialogue, movement and relations. Splice words like film. Move this consonant with that vowel. Pair these symbols with those verbs to make them transitive. Remove 2 pronouns from any given paragraph. Turn them around and try to place them back where they belong. Melt the sounds that hang in the ether. Hold a match under middle C until you see its fingers slip from the clef. Hone in on the voices. Try to find the downbeat in a mnemonic symphony.
Our last reader is Chris Slake. In the spring of 1998, Bill Boyd, a middle school English teacher at the McCallie School for Young Men in Chattanooga, decided to bump one of his young advisees up to an honors English course for the following year. This student, Christopher Slade, had never before experienced the privileges of accepting academic honors or attending courses for gifted children. Thus, in 8th grade, he decided, this must be what I'm good at. I will probably have a major in it in college. Luckily, this did not remain his only motivation for later pursuing a degree in English. Soon, the works of storytellers such as Scott Fitzgerald, Jack London, Kate Chopin, Charlie Kaufman, Homer, Walker Percy, Joni Mitchell, and Frederick Buechner filled his imagination with hopes of one day attaining an ability to communicate the beauty, humor, music, wisdom, and faith he encountered daily. During his 4-year career at Berry, Chris has served with KCAB, Ramifications, the Berry College Choir, Mount Berry Church, and the Rome Area Mentors. Currently, he works for Professor Mike McGinn, who is also mentoring him in fiction writing, teaching him to write without fear of imminent failure and rejection from his peers. He spent the summer of 2004 recording a full-length album of original music for Music for Missions, a Chattanooga-based nonprofit record label created to raise money for indigenous churches in Asia. In June of 2006, he is marrying Lindsay Walker. If you knew her, you'd be jealous.
This first poem that I'm going to read was written, the prompt was, think of the first room that you remember. So this was inspired by that, but it's actually the first room and then turned into a whole building. So I followed directions as well. At an early age, look up, a vaulted ceiling painted like the sky, hot air balloons hanging, baby animals piloting, up, 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 to the higher home of God. After Mom's lap in a picture book, we took a tour of the place. An elephant-sized elevator, everything so clean, lights reflections in every corner, halls stretching out of sight either direction, fairy tales on all TVs, a mural of birds and talking tree, a bathtub the size of my bedroom, felt puppets that can really cry, saying, this is what it means to open. It's okay. A balloon with arms and legs followed when I crossed the corridor. Dad surprised me before bed with bravery award. A teddy bear that could speak and tell a story, to help me try to understand and dream of airship's hover. Night 2, in its way exciting. Done for the day, lights out, quiet mouse. My balloon man slid down the wall. In the stillness I felt the chill of seeing a set after a show. No one had noticed the curtains were not closed. Beyond and below the window, entire city, fixed and far like constellations, without a mind to think of me. Speak to me. I want some water. Mom stirred asleep, upright in the chair. But in the morning I will go somewhere, alone. Even she and Dad cannot go. Under the brightest lights I've known, the forms of kind strangers lean over me and offer air that tastes like strawberries. What's the highest number you can reach? Can you count backwards for us? 27. No, higher. Higher than these elevators. Longer than these halls. Wider than I love you so much. All of the creatures who live inside God's mansion and graze upon our sky. Count them one at a time. Then count backwards from the finish of God's unending timeline. The beginning of his unbegotten chariot race around the universe. Would they see him inside of me? I tried to ask, but my mouth was too light. One last thought before they opened it. Am I going even higher? Okay. And I find this book. Okay. 2 more poems and then a piece from fiction. This is a sonnet called Running Home to Ali. It is about Cherokee location. Like a flame that flickers before it's extinguished, rebuking the room for letting it die, the sun glared intense with American English, and died in the Cherokee child in flight. For her sweet yellow teeth and crackly sing-song, he braved the ravine and followed the creek. For her stories were kinder than Jacob song. The water bugs grinned, the beavers agreed. The deeper he ran, the trees calmed him up, the shouts of Christian boys still far behind. With few indigenous words that they troubled, they used all the time, weird and light. The sunset was lost in the old forest labyrinth, save the strobing motif of light in its absence. This is called On History. Like a glass filled to the lip, set down hastily with a risky thud, in a moment of indignation, spilling embarrassing spatters on an unvarnished, unfinished Civil War trunk, still intact after all these years, bloodstains and all. Sorry for all. On history, I must have an opinion. And this might be a little bit of explanation about, is a short story about all of the religious environments that this one boy travels through throughout his life. And near the end of it, he has to go to a dermatologist's office because of a really bad case of poison ivy, and he falls asleep and has vision. The following afternoon in the dermatologist's waiting room, he begins to regain the lost sleep while watching a program on National Geographic television. The largest mammal on our planet, the blue whale, breeds in an unknown location. Several other images play before he is completely out. The carcass of an infant sperm whale being devoured by long, worm-like hagfish, its pyre of white seafood, an Arctic panorama, and an interview with Inuit Indians describing the mysterious relationship between belugas and bowheads. In the water below a thick ceiling of ice, the cameraman slowly journeys toward the distant ethereal display. Light from a hole in the ice attempts to spotlight the performance, but dissolves just out of reach. The obsidian body of a moose bowhead has only become visible through a camera by the reflection of 12 pale luminescent belugas circling the graceful roll. The ritual slowly breaks as they assume a more erratic pattern around the creature. Throughout this display, their high-pitched targets echo in the icy underwater community. One arrives to greet the camera. Up close, the individual beluga's spine, uniformly straight, arcs out of its back as if it is constantly emerging from its own body. The bowhead has vanished, and the room beneath the ice is silent. The cameraman spins in a panic, eventually arriving at the image of the beluga's tail disappearing beneath his feet. Then urgently jerks the camera from the videographer and propels himself downward toward the heavenly bodies. Eventually, they too disappear entirely, but he can hear their conversation, resuming and building with the scent, now sounding like a whistling host of immortal fireworks. The journey is much farther than he expects. Still, he swims with his legs, holding the camera straight ahead, following the course into the abyss, certain they are leading him and his viewers to the mating ground of the blue whale. In total darkness, he strikes the bottom, and the voices disappear. One pinhole of light appears from the seafloor, making visible the outline of the stripped sperm whale skeleton. Swarm with thousands of worm-like creatures. He hears the faint whistling in the skies calling him through the tiny hole. The oxygen supply is nearly empty. Seaweed wraps around his face and neck. He claws through the whale carcass and sand, trying to make the hole wider, but his efforts only amount to an itching and scratching that causes the ground to swell around the impossible entrance. An overwhelming diagnosis of life rushes to greet him as he opens his eyes and hears his name called from the examination.
Thank you all so much for coming. Well, great.